All right, now that we have accomplished some opacity on our object, let's go ahead and work on the background. Now I want to make sure that when I work on the background, or if I already worked on the background, now I'm working on my object, we always need to make sure that our paper is dry up against the object that we're going to paint, okay? So if I were to come in and start to paint the background and my object was still wet, the background paint would start to bleed into the object itself. So we want to always make sure we're working next to other objects that are completely dry so they don't bleed together. Okay, same thing goes with just the object itself. If my orange was wet here and I came in with this coppery gold color, that could bleed together. My label with my actual object itself could bleed together. So you always want to make sure whenever you're painting next to something, you always want to make sure and ensure that it is dry. Just like the yellow next to the green or whatever the case may be on your objects, ensuring things are dry. Okay. Now I'm going to come in with kind of almost like the color of this table. I'm going to go for a more earthy look. I feel like this is a kind of rustic, kind of earthy object that would go well with a brownish kind of color. I don't want to go too dark because I still want to keep the integrity of where the shadow is going to be, but also have fun with it. You can kind of make whatever color background you want, but I'm going to go with the brown mixed with a little bit of yellow and black. And secondly, I'm going to go opaque on the horizon line to transparent towards the bottom. So opaque up against the horizon line. Once again, horizon line is where the ground meets the sky or the sky meets the ground, vice versa. So I'm going to go dark along the edge there and going to fade it out. And then once again, create the shadow just like I did with this sphere right here. Okay, so I'm going to come in, making sure it is all dry, position myself in a way that makes most sense and is most comfortable. I'm working in a larger area, so whenever you're working in a larger area, you want to use a larger brush. Whenever you narrow down to more smaller detailed stuff, then you'll start to use your smaller brushes. I'm going to go right there. I'm using a flat edge brush, and I'm using it on the side and just kind of going right up against the edge, whatever is most comfortable for you. Get some more water. Whenever you start to feel that kind of dryness happening, just go ahead and grab some more water. You can move the paint around what's already on the paper. I can also come in and grab more color. Okay, now with my larger brush, I'm able to fill the surface area a lot quicker and more efficiently and smooth it all out. Okay, I'm getting right up against my object there, blending it out, coming in with more water and paint. You can build this up in layers. This is not just a one and done kind of thing, okay? Anytime you're working with watercolor, you really want to just try and build up the layers and not just think it's a one and done situation. We want to enhance and develop that opacity. We want to build up the layers and ensure if we do make a mistake, it's always easier to fix a mistake if it's on the transparent side versus the opaque side. So these are all things you want to take into consideration when working with your watercolor. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just work that down. Once again, I want to go now more transparent. So I'm just going to come in with straight water and blend the color that's still wet. This brownish color is still wet on my paper. So I'm just going to add water from my cup directly onto the paper to blend that out and not get more paint, because then if we add more paint, then we might not be able to blend it out as well. Okay, so that looks pretty successful there. Blending that into the transparent white paper. Okay, now we can come in and do the other side. Now you'll want to make sure you mimic what you did on either side. You don't want it to look like two different backgrounds. Once again, I'm positioning myself to be comfortable in keeping the integrity of that straight line for the horizon line. Now this side I need to be really careful because I don't want any of that brown to get into the white label. Okay, making sure my hand doesn't hit the paper where there is wet paint. You want to keep the integrity of the craftsmanship of your painting. I always work my way in towards an edge. I don't want to start on the edge and work my way out. I think it's always most effective and comfortable, and you have the most control when you work your way in to the edge. Once again, I'm using this flat edge brush so I can get a nice, clean, straight line right up against my object. Okay. Coming in with a little bit more paint, developing the opacity. I am fading it out to transparent. Now this is just one more layer. I'm going to do more layers on the background itself, or the brown area, to really enhance that opacity. Okay, coming in with just water and working the color that's already on my paper and blending that out into the transparent. Do not overwork anything with too much water, as that will start to tear your paper, and if you tear your paper, then there is no going back, sadly. Developing some more opacity up there. Fading that into the transparent. Positioning myself for whatever's most comfortable right up against my object, like before. Ensuring that my object is dry, or else these would bleed together, like I previously mentioned. Creating a nice flat application so things don't look rough and jaggedy, and they look how watercolor should be understood and applied onto your paper for what we're trying to achieve right now. Okay. So I will go ahead and let that dry. If I did want to continue to work, I would probably work on the spout up there because it won't ruin the integrity of my background and bleed into it. So you can start to think about how you can paint one area and then you can work on another area that won't affect what you just painted. So if you were painting the background, you wouldn't be like, all right, I'm done, I need it to dry. You can continue to work, just make sure you're working in a different area. Also make sure your hand is not getting onto the paper itself where it's wet and you might smear it, especially in this sky area, because we want to keep that nice and clean. Okay, I'm going to start to introduce the shadow. I'm going to come in with a darker version of my brown. What I like to say is, if you think of a tree that's in the grassy field and the tree casts a shadow onto the grass is just a darker version of green. It's not a whole new color. So if I put my hand here, the shadow created on the white paper, the shadow is still on top of the white. It's just making a darker version of the white. Okay, if I put my hand on top of this orange, it's a darker version of the orange. It's not a new color. It's just darker of whatever it was. So I know my light source is coming in from the left-hand side because when I'm looking at my object, the highlight is on the left and then it pushes a shadow on the right. So for me, I'm going to come over here and kind of understand where the shadow is going to be. Push that darker. It's a darker version of the brown I'm already using. You can do this through the use of complementary colors, which I would highly suggest if you are using one of the 6 colors from the color wheel. Red and green are complementary colors, blue and orange are complementary colors, yellow and violet are complementary colors, but for me, there is no real complementary color to brown, so I'm just going to use a little bit of black to enhance that. I did also mix a little bit of yellow into it, and if I want, eventually down the road, I can add a little bit layer of orange on top as well to show like the orange is reflecting its color onto the ground itself as well, which can help develop the idea of the object casting a shadow. Okay, so your shadow, you want to pay attention to what your shadow looks like on your object. Everybody's shadow is going to be a little different. I know my object's shadow is actually pretty close and similar to this guy, but that's just kind of how it happened. And then it's got the spout for the shadow, so that's just going to go and be cropped off the page. Okay, so your shadow could look completely different. Your shadow might be looking like this kind of shadow underneath the little duck. Got some shadows going on here underneath these objects. Just paying attention to exactly what you see, how you see it, and the shadow mimics the shape of the object. Okay, so it's kind of rounded here for the rounded bulb. This smaller, kind of skinnier shadow for the paintbrush itself. So every shadow mimics the actual object itself. Here's another pretty good example. You can see how the shadow is the same kind of object or outline idea of that. And once again, shadows are always darkest closest to the object, or where they layer up over multiple times if you have multiple light sources. But that's something we can investigate later, or you can start to understand that now, seeing how there's darker shadows closest to the object. And once again, if you do have two light sources, those light sources will overlap and cross over like you see here and create an even darker shadow, like right there. Okay, so go ahead and continue to work on your object. If you are ready to work on the ground, you are ready for that, just making sure everything around it is dry. I'll let this dry, and then in my next video, I'll continue to work on the actual object itself. Happy painting!